Hey dudes and dudettes, it's me, E.H. Ivins, and this is another edition of the Radical Reset. Today we're going to talk about Joe Biden. And the reason we're going to talk about Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump, which seems to be what everybody talks about because the guy is just so loud. And you know, he's had his COVID and he's been in the hospital, he's been out of the hospital, blah, blah, blah. But here it is, guys. Donald Trump's going to lose. Now look, I'm not here to get in an argument with you. And it's always amazing to me. May I digress for a moment and just share with you that, as I said earlier, I'm not going to discuss anti-politism for this last few weeks of the election because it's irrelevant currently, because it doesn't really exist except in my mind and the minds of a few of you that are following me. But for the rest of us, I'm going to talk about the election, as I promised I would, and a little bit about libertarian politics, because the only candidate running who's really worth a damn, in my opinion, is Jo Jorgensen, the libertarian candidate, though she has no chance. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about Joe Biden because he's going to win. And so let's talk about reality as it is. As much as I would love to talk about Joe and talk about all the things that she could do and you know, how the economy would boom under her, as I am absolutely positively certain that it would, it's not going to happen. You know, it's an interesting thing. When I talk to people about voting third party, and I'll get right back to Joe Biden, I promise. When I talk to people about voting third party and about voting for Jo Jorgensen, they always say, I don't want to waste my vote. Let's think about that statement for a moment. I don't want to waste my vote. What does that mean? Does that mean that your vote is the hinge vote? You know, and the example that's always given is the Bush-Gore election back, pardon me, I got to scratch my nose, back in 2000 that was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court in George Bush's favor, although I'd be perfectly honest with you, I think that was a wrongfully decided decision. I think George Bush probably won, but I think that the process was cut off a little bit early. But anyway, I digress. That's not important. It's over. Bush served. End of story. Now, having said that, in this election, America's going to get lucky. America's going to get lucky because this is not going to be a close election. I know that all of the experts are saying it's going to be close, it's going to be close, it's going to be close. It's going to be a blowout. You know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And Donald Trump is such a bull in the china shop, and I'm being as clean as I can when I say that. The guy is just a hot mess. And as I spoke about in my last podcast, I don't think he ever intended to become president, and he's lived right down to that expectation along the way. Not that he hasn't done good things, and I'll discuss those in another podcast a little bit later, but the guy's a hot mess, and he's going to lose. So I thought it would be important for us to talk about Joe Biden. But anyway, back to the issue of wasted votes. I know I'm skipping around this morning, but I'm in a really good mood, and I feel like surfing with you a little bit. Yours is not going to be the vote unless you live, well, even if you live in Florida. I mean, yours is not going to be the vote that determines the election. Why do you need to be on the winning team? In other words, if you voted for Jo Jorgensen and Joe loses, why is that any different from voting for Donald Trump if he loses? Or Joe Biden if he loses, although I think it's highly unlikely. What is the difference? I mean, you still voted for the losing side, but does that make you any less American? Does that make you any less participatory? Does that somehow subtract from your rights to criticize later when the person that you didn't vote for becomes president and you have differences of opinion and want to voice those opinions either on social media or among your friends or, you know, whatever venue you might use? Why do we have to be, it kind of reminds me, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and the Arizona Cardinals are my football team. And last weekend, they stunk it up pretty good. They were playing the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers just wiped up the ground with them. Now, here's the thing. Everyone I know said we lost, but we didn't lose. They lost. In other words, we, the fans, do not play on the team of the football team. We're not out there getting our bodies beat up. Now, it's nice to identify with the team, and it's nice to make that team, you know, something special to you. I love my Cardinals. Don't get me wrong. I love that they're 3-1, and I love that they have a shot at going all the way this year. And I love, you know, the way everything's shaping up for the team. I love everything about it. But here's the thing. I don't actually play on the Arizona Cardinals any more than you play on the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants, the Chicago Bears, whoever it is that you follow. So the bottom line here is, in voting, using that same analogy, why is it important that you're not on the winning team? You're not the one playing. So why not cast your vote for the person that you believe is best for the country? And, ultimately, if enough people stop worrying about what the conventional wisdom says is the winning side, then we might actually get some real alternatives like Jo Jorgensen, who would be not only the first female president, but I think a great president. But she's not, we're never going to find out. My opinion is going to be like useless because she's not going to win. Okay, so let's talk about Joe Biden. Back on track. Look, guys, in my opinion, you should vote for Jo Jorgensen. That's it. I'll say it again and again and again. In this election, since anti-politism is not the system of the land, and I'll get back to discussing that after the election, you guys need to vote for Jo Jorgensen. Okay, now, but most of you aren't going to vote for Jo Jorgensen. And even when I go on the libertarian websites, there are a lot of people that call themselves libertarian or not websites, Facebook groups in particular. I use Facebook a lot, although it really annoys me, but gives me more room to say what I have in my mind that I can't really cough it up in 240 characters or whatever. But anyway, a lot of libertarians are really Democrats and Republicans masquerading as libertarians. They're really, like, their heart is really in it for Trump and their heart is really in it for Biden. Mostly for Trump. Mostly I see that they're supporting Trump. But Trump is no libertarian, not by any stretch of the imagination. Spending under Trump has exploded, as much more so than it did under his predecessor, Obama. I mean, Trump said that he was going to balance the budget in 8 years, another one of his many broken promises. But we're not going to need to worry about that because he's going to lose. He's not only going to lose, he's going to lose bad. So let's talk about the thing. Trump insists that if Joe Biden's elected, and Trump supporters insist, I see this on the internet all the time, they insist that Joe Biden's economic plans are going to cause a disaster. Well, I did some research, and so I'm going to be looking down from time to time because I made notes and I want to make sure that I cover everything. But there's been some studies done. Now, studies are like assholes, right? I mean, there's just, everyone's got one, right? I mean, and so when I cite these studies, I preface it by a huge grain of salt, okay? The only reason I'm even going to cite these studies, and I'm going to cite these results, and I'm going to cite these opinions, which is all they are, is because they're mainstream, and so they have as much chance of being right as anything else, okay? They may or may not be right. I personally think we're going to have an economic disaster, regardless of who's president, because of the enormous amount of deficit spending going on, Democrat and Republican. But let's put that aside. Let's pretend I'm wrong. Let's pretend we go through this election. Let's pretend America's a tough old girl. Let's pretend, like in so many elections in the past, doom and gloom never comes to pass. Joe Biden becomes president and things settle down after the election because it's not close. Trump leaves office. He becomes, as I discussed in a prior video, a martyr to, his third of the population that thinks he walks on water. He goes out and gives lots of speeches and becomes a bigger billionaire than he's ever been before. And poor Joe Biden becomes president of the United States. But now he's not only going to be president of the United States, but he's going to have a Democratic Senate and he's going to have a Democratic House. Again, in all probability, it looks to me like, with the exception of Alabama, where the Republicans are going to pick up a seat that they never should have lost when Doug Jones beat that racist, misogynist judge guy, I forget his name down there, rightfully so. And Doug Jones has been a good senator, but he's not going to win in Alabama, which is as red a red state as it's going to be. So Doug, good job. Good job taking one for the team, but buddy, you're done. Other than that, though, the Republicans are going to lose the Senate. They're going to lose the seat in Maine. They're going to lose the seat in Arizona, where I live. Martha McSally is going to get crushed by Mark Kelly, who is the astronaut husband of Gabrielle Giffords, who was shot in the head, and it's very tough to beat the sympathy factor on that. I'm being cold when I say that, but it's true. Plus, he's a much more attractive candidate. Martha McSally is just a terrible candidate. How she got, anyway, I digress. I don't want to get into Arizona politics. They'll just bore you. But anyway, as we go down the line, they're going to lose the Colorado Senate seat. Cory Gardner's going to go down to defeat. And there are a number of other seats the Republicans are in danger of losing, and losing bad. There is a very good chance the Republicans are going to lose the Senate. So we're going to get the Biden plan. Biden's going to pass the plan. And so the question is it a bad plan? Is Biden's tax plan for the economy, as Trump says, going to destroy everything? Now, again, let me preface before I get into this analysis and what these studies say, that I'm not in favor of the Biden plan whatsoever, any more than I'm in favor of Trump's idea. I'm a libertarian. I would reduce the government to 4 departments and shut most of it down and take the income tax to a flat 10% and call it a day. And I would make it a sales tax, not an income tax, but I digress. None of that's going to happen. So let's talk about the tax plan. It's not going to happen today. I mean, it could happen someday, God willing, and the creek doesn't rise. But It's not going to happen today. So, under the Biden tax plan, the people making over $400,000 a year, and that's not a lie. He's really right. When he designed the tax plan and he touts it, and Trump says it's not true, it is true. He's going to raise taxes only on those people making more than $400,000 a year, and he's going to raise the top marginal tax rate to 39.6%. But he's also going to reintroduce deductibility unlimited of state income taxes. Now, the reason he's going to do that is because certain states like California and New York have very high income taxes. And obviously they're blue Democratic states. And if the people who live there can't deduct the income tax, the state income tax from the federal, then that's an incentive for them to leave to go to a state with much lower income tax, which would be against the interests of those blue state governors and legislatures that Joe Biden obviously logically will support. Therefore, he's going to return the deductibility so that it makes the state income tax impact negligible against the federal. If you're going to pay 39.6%, what difference does it make what the mix is between state and federal? And if you can deduct your state income tax from your federal, then the total combined tax you're going to pay is only going to be a maximum of 39.6%. And that's only on people making $400,000 a year. Now, let's start with the Penn-Wharton School. Now, the Wharton School of Business, for those of you who don't know where that is, it's at the University of Pennsylvania. Do not confuse the University of Pennsylvania with Penn State. The University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League school, like Harvard and like Yale. It is the original, I believe, by the way, write me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm almost positive it's the original Ivy League school, founded by, I believe, Benjamin Franklin. It's in Philadelphia. Actually, one of my dearest and oldest friends, who's a urologist in Philadelphia, went to the University of Pennsylvania. It's a very fine school. The Wharton School of Business is considered to be in the top tier of business schools in the United States, along with the University of Chicago, NYU, so on and so on. I mean, Stanford. There are a lot of good business programs, but Wharton is considered, if not the best, certainly among the top 2 or 3 or 4 best. And they came out and they said that currently, after what Trump called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 that Trump passed, that he touts all the time as making the economy a big deal, it knocked government revenue to 16% of gross domestic product. In other words, 16% of the total income of the United States has become what the federal government collects in tax. It spends another 16% besides, at least, right? So it's actually spending twice as much as it's taking in, hence the enormous deficits. But that's irrelevant for this discussion. For this discussion, the tax system is pulling in 16%, which is way below where it normally is. Even under President Reagan, it was 19% of gross domestic product. So in other words, we're making our deficits worse by not collecting enough tax. Now, Trump would say that if we raise the taxes, it's going to destroy the economy. But here's the thing. When Trump put in the Tax Act, the economy was growing at 2.4% per year, and he promised it would grow at 3% per year. So how fast did the economy grow after the Tax and Jobs Act? 2.4%. The 3% never materialized. It had virtually no effect. Far below the 3, and that doesn't sound like a big difference, 2.4 to 3%, but that's actually a huge difference in actual dollars, and it just never happened. So, based on the study by the Wharton School and also by Goldman Sachs, which is obviously extremely well-known and very reputable financial institution, it would the effect of repealing, and Biden, by the way, is not calling for the entire repeal of the Tax and Jobs Act. In other words, for example, in corporate taxes, he's calling for raising the corporate tax, but only to half of what it was under Obama. In other words, or take away half the decrease that Trump took away, in other words. So bring back some higher corporate taxes, but not all the way back up to where it was under Obama, which forced a lot of U.S. companies to offshore. You know, there's a balance in all of these things. So he's not repealing the whole thing, and the effect is going to be very, very negligible. The Penn-Wharton model, as well as one done by the American Enterprise Institute, which is a free market institute, says the impact of the Biden tax plan would be negligible. Okay, in other words, don't lose any sleep. The growth rate is going to be just fine under both. However, it did find that it would add 1 point. Now, here's where we get in the difference between. This is going to get really weird. Between Keynesian economics and free market economics, the von Mises / Hayek / Milton Friedman / Chicago School, basically of laissez-faire economics. If you buy into the Keynesian model, which I do not, then the Biden plan will add 1% of GDP. And the reason I mention that, even though I don't agree with it, is because I could be wrong. And, since I'm not running for office, and since I'm not a power-mad maniac out there, just trying to sway you, and I don't have any particularly strong leanings for either of the two major candidates one way or the other, I'm not going to get hyperbolic and make these tremendous claims. The Biden plan is not going to add any growth. In fact, I think we're going to end up, as I said before, in an inflationary depression, but it's not going to be by itself the cause of the inflationary depression. And if I'm wrong, we have to start whittling away at this deficit. We have to start whittling away at this debt, whether it's Democrats and Republicans. And you may recall, those of us who've lived a long time, and I'm 63 years old, I've lived through Democratic presidencies. To my Republican friends, you'd think it was the end of the world, but it's not. Okay, President Clinton had a very successful economic presidency. President Obama had a very successful economic presidency. Yeah, you can say Obama's growth was the lowest of any recovery, but it was a recovery, and it did sustain for 8 years. And Clinton's economic plan was excellent, and both of them raised taxes during their terms, and both of them had terrific growth. So the idea that raising taxes is going to instantly and necessarily cause the economy to collapse is nonsense. And the Biden tax plan, for the vast majority of you watching me, is going to have no effect on you at all. On top of that, he's going to back this enormous stimulus. Now, again, I'm not in favor of this because I think we have to whittle away at some of these deficit issues, but it's going to happen anyway. And if you buy into the Keynesian model, which is to say that the government can intervene and pump money into the economy to level out the peaks and valleys, if you believe that, then the Pelosi plan that's in the House, which will end up passing if Biden's elected, when Biden's elected, and everyone's going to get another $1,200 check and maybe more, plus checks for their children and checks for, there's going to be a lot of money flowing to the economy. Now, in my personal opinion, these will be all used in ways the government never thinks of. One of the things that government does, whether it's Democrat or Republican, is that it only acts in the moment. It never thinks about the long-term effects of what it's doing down the road. So while, I'm positive these things are going to pass, and I'm positive we're all going to get checks. And from a purely selfish point of view, I'm just as happy as the next person to get my check. Any economic benefit that it produces is going to be a chimera, which is a fancy way for saying a mirage. I don't even know why I used that fancy word. I think it was just the show off. I apologize. So the bottom line is, it's all a mirage. Now, but who among us is going to turn down a check? So we're all going to get a bunch of checks. Most of us are not going to get a tax increase. Biden's tax plan is going to go into effect probably almost as it's written, and some of it will be mitigated. I mean, there'll be a lot of lobbying and pushing and pulling. And, Democrat is a label, but there are Democrats and then there are Democrats. There are working collar, blue collar white Democrats who tend to be very conservative in many ways, but are more, of the working class. And then there's the limousine liberal Democrats of Hollywood, and then there's everything in between. So they represent, yes, I know that people like AOC and Ilhan Omar and the rest of them get a lot of press, and, and Elizabeth Warren. But the fact is, get all the Sturm und Drang, all the yelling and screaming out of the way. The center of the Democratic Party is left of center, but not far left. Okay, America's a tough old girl, guys. We're a tough old girl. We're a tough country. We're going to survive Joe Biden just like we survived Donald Trump. And yes, change is going to come because change is a constant in everything. And I obviously, as the proponent of antipolitism, democracy by selection, not election, which again, I'll cover more of again, and we'll come back and review and talk about after the election and when we see the actual results of what's going on. For now, dwelling on what is, it isn't going to make a big difference that Joe Biden's elected, other than, I don't know about you, but at least one positive thing that I'm sure of with Joe Biden as president is that the yelling and screaming is going to calm down. And I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted. I am exhausted by the tweets and the fighting and the aggression and the name calling and everything. And the coarsening of society, our society, Donald Trump's done a lot of things that are good and a lot of things that are bad. But I think the worst thing that he's done, the thing that caps it all off, and there are so many, it's hard to list them all, but to me, the worst thing is he's contributed to the coarsening of our society, where we were already losing any semblance of propriety and good manners and what's proper and where and when do you say certain words. For example, when I go into a restaurant, or I'll give you another example. I was out at this last weekend with my dog Pepper, who's an Airedale Terrier and the most beautiful girl in the world, let me tell you. Anyway, we were out at a farmer's market this last weekend, and as we're walking around, I'm seeing, young kids, when I say that, teenagers, standing next to families with children, hurling the F-bomb back and forth. Fuck this and fuck that and fuck this and fuck that, right next to children, without any thought as to whether or not that's appropriate. And we've lost that in our society. And it starts in the example set by our leadership, I believe. So when you look at a guy like Donald Trump, who's supposed to be ostensibly, and the president's power is overestimated, but his bully pulpit, where he stands, or where the future she president will stand, and has this microphone, affects a lot about the popular culture. And Donald Trump has coarsened it. He's a pig. Okay, I mean, the guy has said everything from, the grabbing pussy comment to, calling everybody that doesn't agree with him names, to denigrate. I mean, he's a stupid, ignorant pig, really. I mean, is there any other way to look at it? If you knew someone like Donald Trump, wouldn't you think they're a stupid, ignorant pig? I mean, seriously. I mean, I understand that, you might have selfish interests and you might buy into this Make America Great. America's already great, guys. We're a great country. We're going to weather this storm, believe me. I mean, I understand that the transient news, Joe Biden is not the end of the world. Joe Biden's tax plan is not the end of the world. Joe Biden's economic plans are not the end of the world. They're no better or worse than Trump's. Overall, the system is rotten. I, as a person who advocates a radical reset, I believe the entire system is rotten and needs to be changed and downsized drastically. But in the present that we live in, and the system that we live in now, during this particular little window of time before a presidential election, just concentrating on what is, not on what could be, Joe Biden is not the worst of the two major choices. He's the better of the two major choices, frankly, I think. I think this country's had enough coarsening of its culture. I think this country has enough name-calling. I think we're mad enough at each other. I think a little calming down would be good. Now, sadly, I'm a little worried that there could be massive protests and so on and so forth. But the good news is the right generally doesn't riot. Now, when I say that, I understand that there are groups like the Proud Boys and there are groups like the Ku Klux Klan, but that's not the right. The left tries to paint the right with that, but that's not true. Those are fringe Nazi groups that have nothing to do with the Republican Party, okay? They are, white supremacist, Nazi, racist nonsense groups. Any more than Antifa represents the point of view of most Democrats. Antifa does not represent the view of most Democrats. But the good news is, where the left is more inclined to riot because of Antifa and BLM being much larger movements, the fact is, Antifa and BLM, and there's no way I can prove this, but doesn't your gut tell you this is true? There's many more of them than there are KKK members or neo-Nazis. They're a big group, and so they're inclined, if you believe what's going on in the cities today, and of course you have to believe it, it's a fact, they're more inclined to riot. So when Joe Biden wins, probably the streets are going to stay quiet, even though Trump's people will be furious. Now, there will be talks about everything up to it, including secession. I mean, I see it all the time in the chat rooms, and there's going to be a lot of anger when Trump loses, but he's going to lose, okay? And we're going to get Biden, and we're going to get the Biden tax plan, and we're going to get the Pelosi stimulus, and we're going to have a lot to talk about, and we're going to have a lot to criticize, and I will be right out there as an anti-politist talking about why the whole system is corrupt and rotten to its core. But in this election, at this moment, and just in case, and while I am positive that the proverbial shit is going to hit the fan, I am not positive it's going to hit the fan next week, okay? I don't know what day it is. Anyone who looks into your eyes and says to you they know what's going to happen next is a charlatan, okay? No matter what. They're no different than, guys who claim they can speak to the dead and all that kind of nonsense. It's just a lot of alchemy. It's nonsense. Yes, everything is set up for there to be a perfect storm of economic disaster, but it might be still 4, 5, 6, who knows, 10 years away. I personally think it's much sooner, but my opinion and a dollar might get you a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it really, it's worth exactly what you're paying for it, just like yours is. All of our opinions are worth nothing. They're just opinions. They're worth something in the context of the broader public debate, but they're worth nothing insofar as they're going to be true. And so, while I am not, one of these human mushrooms that's locked in my room on social media all day hurling invective at each other, I can tell you that we have nothing to worry about, guys. The extremes are going to yell and scream and moan and groan, but for most of us who live in reality, who just want to, look, in the end, I love politics, obviously. I love discussing politics, obviously. But when it comes right down to it, I'd much rather spend time with my family and my grandson and my dog. I mean, I'll be honest with you. To sit there and discuss politics all day is central to my existence. It just isn't. So the purpose of this, and let me just wrap it up, and then I'll bring this particular episode to an end. The purpose of this whole discussion is to A, assure you that the Biden tax plan and the Biden economic policy is not going to destroy you, and B, life will go on. Life will go on. Life will go on. But is there going to be a President Biden? Yes. There's going to be a President Biden and a Vice President Harris. And I make it 50-50 that Biden doesn't finish the term and we end up with the first female president. But listen, we have so much to talk about in future episodes. It's just going to be so much fun. And for those of us who believe that both parties are corrupt, really, if you're being intellectually honest with yourself, you have to say, what does it matter? What does it matter? Anyway, that's what I think. I think Biden's going to get elected. I think his tax plan is going to be basically neutral. And I think most of us are going to live our lives happily ever after. And for the ultra rich making $1 billion a year, having their tax rates go up, a few percent isn't going to kill them. What can I tell you? And for a lot of them, it's going to end up being a tax cut because they're going to be able, like I said, to deduct the state income tax in California and New York and yada, yada, yada. But okay, that's enough. Before we go today, make sure, please, if you haven't already, that you click the subscribe button, click the notification button, share this with your friends. Let's spread the word. Let's talk about the radical reset. Let's talk about, I see a lot of political commentators, and some of them are very good, some of them aren't. But the one thing I'm not is biased towards the Republicans or the Democrats. And so for a neutral voice, I think I have a strong one, and I think antipolitism is a strong message. So I really encourage and invite you to join us and to join the movement and to watch the podcast and to share the podcast, and let's grow the audience and let's change our country in the long run for the better. And that's it for today. Thanks so very, very, can't speak English. Thanks so very, very much for joining me today. And until next time, this is E.H. Ivins saying so long.